The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Guard Captain James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. 23 years of service had taught him that every day brought something unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for what would unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday in March. The royal family was hosting a state dinner for visiting diplomats from 12 nations. Security protocols were at their highest level, with every guard positioned strategically throughout the palace grounds. James had briefed his team 3 times that morning, emphasizing the importance of maintaining absolute professionalism and alertness. As he walked his usual inspection route, James noticed something that made him pause. Near the servants' entrance, a small figure huddled against the cold stone wall. It was a boy no more than 8 years old, wearing clothes that had seen better days and shoes with holes that let in the March chill. The child's eyes were red from crying, and he clutched a crumpled piece of paper in his small hands. Protocol dictated that James should immediately report any unauthorized person on palace grounds and have them removed by security. The state dinner was only hours away, and every detail had to be perfect. But something about the child's desperate expression stopped him from reaching for his radio. Instead, James approached slowly, his heavy boots echoing against the cobblestones. The boy looked up with frightened eyes, clearly expecting to be sent away or worse. James knelt down to the child's level, his usually stern expression softening. "What's your name, son?" James asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve before answering. "Tommy, sir. Tommy Henderson." "What brings you here today, Tommy?" This isn't exactly a playground. Tommy's lower lip trembled as he held up the crumpled paper. James carefully took it and smoothed it out. It was a letter written in a child's handwriting addressed to the Queen. The spelling was imperfect, but the message was clear and heartbreaking. The letter explained that Tommy's mother was very sick in the hospital. The doctors said she needed an expensive treatment that the family couldn't afford. Tommy had heard that the Queen was kind and helped people in trouble. He had walked 15 miles from his neighborhood, hoping somehow to deliver his letter and ask for help. James felt his throat tighten as he read the innocent words. Here was a child who had such faith in the monarchy that he believed the Queen would personally read his letter and help his family. The guard captain looked at Tommy's worn shoes and realized the boy had probably walked all night to reach the palace. "Tommy, how long have you been sitting here?" James asked, though he dreaded. The answer: "Since the sun came up, sir. A man in a uniform told me I couldn't come inside, but I thought if I waited, maybe someone would take my letter to the Queen." James glanced at his watch. The boy had been sitting in the cold for over 4 hours. His lips had a slight blue tinge, and he was shivering despite trying to appear brave. Every instinct James had developed as a father and as a human being told him he couldn't simply follow protocol and send this child away. The captain's radio crackled to life. "Captain Morrison, report to the main entrance for final security sweep." James pressed the talk button. "Copy that. En route in 5 minutes." He looked back at Tommy, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. The boy clearly understood that this guard was different from the others who had already turned him away that morning. "Tommy, I need you to come with me," James said, standing up. "But you have to promise to stay close and do exactly what I say." The boy nodded eagerly, scrambling to his feet. James noticed how thin Tommy was beneath his oversized jacket. When was the last time this child had eaten a proper meal? As they walked toward the palace, James's mind raced. He was about to break several protocols and potentially risk his career. But looking down at Tommy's trusting face, he knew he couldn't live with himself if he simply followed the rules and sent this desperate child away. The other guards they passed gave James curious looks. It was highly unusual to see the strict captain escorting a civilian child through the palace grounds, especially on such an important day. James nodded to his colleagues but offered no explanation, his jaw set with determination. They approached the palace's side entrance, where James knew the kitchen staff would be frantically preparing for the evening's feast. He had an idea, but it would require calling in several favors and hoping that compassion could triumph over protocol. "Tommy," James said, stopping just outside the kitchen door, "I want you to know that what you did today took real courage. Walking all this way to help your mother shows what kind of person you are." The boy's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than despair. Someone had finally listened to him. Someone believed his letter was important. James took a deep breath and pushed open the kitchen door. The warm air and delicious smells hit them immediately. Several kitchen staff looked up from their work, surprised to see the head of security with a small visitor. "Mrs. Patterson," James called to the head cook, a woman he had known for 15 years. "I need your help with something important." Margaret Patterson wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and approached. She was known throughout the palace for her kind heart and practical wisdom. James had helped her son get into university 2 years ago, and he hoped she would remember that favor. "This is Tommy," James said simply. "He's traveled a very long way to deliver a message, and he hasn't eaten today." Mrs. Patterson looked from James to Tommy, taking in the child's appearance and the guard captain's serious expression. Without asking any questions, she smiled at Tommy and extended her hand. "Well then, young man, let's get some food in you while Captain Morrison takes care of business." As Tommy followed Mrs. Patterson deeper into the kitchen, James felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He had committed himself to a course of action that could end his career, but he had also potentially changed a child's life forever. 2 hours later, James found himself standing outside the Queen's private office, Tommy's letter carefully preserved in a protective plastic sleeve. His heart pounded as he knocked on the ornate wooden door, knowing that what happened next would define not just Tommy's future, but his own as well. "Enter!" came the familiar voice from within. James stepped into the elegant room where Her Majesty was reviewing documents for the evening's state dinner. She looked up from her papers, her eyebrows raising slightly at the unexpected visit from her head of security. "Captain Morrison, I wasn't expecting you. Is there a security concern I should know about?" James straightened his shoulders and took a deep breath. "Your Majesty, I have something unusual to report. There's a young boy in the kitchen who has traveled 15 miles on foot to deliver a personal letter to you." The Queen set down her reading glasses and gave James her full attention. In all his years of service, she had never known him to bring her anything that wasn't of the utmost importance. "Tell me more," she said simply. James explained Tommy's situation, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was asking. He handed over the letter and watched as the Queen read it carefully, her expression growing more thoughtful with each line. "His mother is Sarah Henderson," the Queen said quietly. "I remember this case from the medical reports. The treatment she needs is experimental, but shows promise. The cost is indeed substantial." James felt a surge of hope. If the Queen was already aware of the situation, perhaps there was a chance for Tommy's family. "Your Majesty, I know I've overstepped my bounds by bringing the boy here, especially today, but I couldn't turn away a child who had such faith in your compassion." The Queen stood and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard where Tommy had been sitting just hours before. She was quiet for several minutes, and James began to worry that he had made a terrible mistake. "Captain Morrison," she finally said, turning back to face him, "in 23 years of service, you have never asked me for anything personal. Your record is exemplary, and your judgment has always been sound. If you felt this situation warranted breaking protocol, then I trust there was good reason." Relief flooded through James, though he tried to maintain his professional composure. "Where is the boy now?" the Queen asked. "In the kitchen with Mrs. Patterson, Your Majesty. He hadn't eaten all day." "Of course he hadn't." The Queen picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Margaret, this is Her Majesty. I understand you have a young guest in the kitchen. Would you please bring him to my office?" and perhaps prepare a proper meal for him to take home. James could hardly believe what was happening. Not only was the Queen agreeing to meet with Tommy, but she was already thinking about his ongoing needs. 15 minutes later, Mrs. Patterson appeared at the door with Tommy in tow. The boy had been cleaned up and fed, but his eyes were wide with nervousness. He had never imagined he would actually meet the Queen. "Your Majesty," Mrs. Patterson said with a curtsy, "this is Tommy Henderson." Tommy attempted an awkward bow, nearly losing his balance in the process. The Queen smiled warmly and gestured for him to sit in one of the comfortable chairs near her desk. "Tommy, Captain Morrison tells me you've had quite an adventure today. You walked a very long way to bring me your letter." Tommy nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. Your Majesty, ma'am. You must love your mother very much to make such a journey." Tears sprang to Tommy's eyes. "She's the best mum in the world. She always takes care of me and my little sister, even when she's feeling sick. The doctors say she needs special medicine, but it costs too much money." The Queen leaned forward, her expression gentle but serious. "Tommy, I want you to know that your letter moved me deeply. It takes great courage to ask for help, especially when you're scared." She opened her desk drawer and withdrew an official-looking document. "I've been following your mother's case through our medical assistance program. The treatment she needs will be fully covered, effective immediately." Tommy's mouth fell open. He looked from the Queen to James to Mrs. Patterson, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Does this mean my mum will get better?" he asked, his voice shaking with hope. "The doctors believe this treatment will help her very much," the Queen replied. "But Tommy, there's something else. Your family will never have to worry about medical bills again. We're establishing a fund to cover all of your mother's health care needs now and in the future." James felt tears prick his own eyes as he watched Tommy's face transform from disbelief to pure joy. The boy's faith in the monarchy had been rewarded beyond his wildest dreams. "But how did you know about my mum already?" Tommy asked, still trying to understand. The Queen smiled. "Tommy, did you know that we receive hundreds of letters every day from people asking for help? We have people whose job it is to read every single one and find ways to assist when we can. Your letter was already in the system, but seeing your determination to deliver it personally made all the difference." She stood up and walked around the desk to Tommy's chair. "You see, sometimes the most important thing isn't the letter itself, but the courage it takes to deliver it. You showed me today that your family doesn't just need help, they deserve it." Tommy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Can I call my mum? She doesn't know where I went. She's probably really worried of—" "Course you can," the Queen said, handing him her personal phone. "But first, let me speak with her." As Tommy dialed the number with shaking fingers, James marveled at what he was witnessing. This was why he had devoted his life to serving the crown. Not for the ceremony or the tradition, but for moments like this when monarchy showed its most human face. The Queen spoke briefly with Tommy's mother, explaining the situation and assuring her that her son was safe. Then she handed the phone to Tommy, who could barely speak through his tears of happiness. "Mom, it worked," he sobbed into the phone. "The Queen is going to help you get better." As Tommy talked to his mother, the Queen turned to James. "Captain, you'll arrange transportation for Tommy to get home safely?" "Already taken care of, Your Majesty. I'll drive him myself after the state dinner." "No," the Queen said firmly. "You'll take him now. The dinner can wait. This young man has been away from his worried mother long enough." James saluted smartly. "Yes, Your Majesty." 6 months later, Guard Lieutenant Sarah Chen was patrolling the palace gardens when she heard an unusual sound coming from behind the rose bushes. It was soft crying, the kind that someone tries to muffle but can't quite contain. Sarah had been with the royal guard for 8 years, and her instincts told her this wasn't a security threat, but rather someone in distress. Following the sound, she discovered an elderly woman sitting on a bench, her face buried in her hands. The woman wore a faded blue dress and carried a worn handbag clutched tightly in her lap. Sarah recognized her immediately as Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, who had become something of a fixture around the palace grounds over the past few weeks. Mrs. Whitmore was 92 years old and had been trying unsuccessfully to gain an audience with the Queen. She appeared at the palace gates every Tuesday and Thursday, always well-dressed despite her obviously limited means, carrying the same old handbag and asking politely if she might speak with Her Majesty about something important. The gate guards had grown accustomed to her visits, always treating her with respect, but explaining that appointments with the Queen required going through proper channels. Mrs. Whitmore would nod politely, say she understood, and promised to try the official routes. But she always returned the following week, hope still flickering in her pale blue eyes. Sarah approached slowly, not wanting to startle the elderly woman. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you all right?" The old woman looked up, quickly wiping her tears with a handkerchief that had seen many such moments. "Oh, Lieutenant Chen, I'm sorry to be causing a fuss. I was just taking a moment to rest before heading home." Sarah sat down beside her on the bench, her official duties temporarily forgotten. "You're not causing a fuss at all, but you seem upset. Is there anything I can do to help?" Mrs. Whitmore's eyes filled with tears again, despite her efforts to remain composed. "Today is the anniversary," she said quietly. 75 years ago today, my husband William saved the king's life during the war. He never talked about it much, said he was just doing his duty." Sarah listened intently as Mrs. Whitmore continued her story. William Whitmore had been a young soldier assigned to the palace security detail during World War II. When a German bomb had hit the palace, he had risked his own life to pull the then-young king to safety from the rubble. For his bravery, William had received a medal and a promise that the royal family would never forget his service. "William passed away last month," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice breaking. "We were married for 68 years. The doctors said his heart just gave out, but I think he died of a broken heart. You see, Lieutenant Chen, we lost our only son in Afghanistan 5 years ago. The grief was too much for William." Sarah felt her own throat tighten with emotion. She had heard stories about the sacrifices made by military families, but hearing it directly from someone living through such loss made it devastatingly real. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry for your losses, but why do you keep coming here? What is it you're hoping to accomplish?" The elderly woman opened her handbag and carefully withdrew a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a military medal with a ribbon that had once been bright red, white, and blue, but had faded with time. This was William's medal for saving the king's life. Before he died, he made me promise to return it to the royal family. He said it belonged with them, not gathering dust in our little flat. But he also asked me to tell them one more thing. Mrs. Whitmore paused, struggling to find the words. Sarah waited patiently, sensing that whatever the elderly woman wanted to share was of great importance to her. Our son James was so proud of his grandfather's service. When he enlisted, he said he wanted to follow in William's footsteps and serve his country. James died protecting his fellow soldiers in Helmand Province. William wanted the royal family to know that our family's service didn't end with him. Sarah stared at the medal in Mrs. Whitmore's weathered hands. Here was a woman who had lost both her husband and her son, yet she was more concerned with honoring their memory and completing a promise than with her own grief. "Mrs. Whitmore, have you tried writing a letter to the Queen? Sometimes that's the best way to ensure your message reaches her." The old woman smiled sadly. "Oh, my dear, I've written dozens of letters. My handwriting isn't what it used to be, and I'm not very good with words on paper. I keep thinking if I could just speak to her face to face, I could properly explain what William wanted me to say." Sarah made a decision that she knew could get her in trouble with her superiors, but she couldn't bear the thought of this grieving widow continuing to make futile trips to the palace. "Mrs. Whitmore, would you trust me to help you? I can't promise anything, but I might know someone who could assist." Hope flickered in the elderly woman's eyes for the first time in weeks. "Would you really try to help me, Lieutenant? I know I'm just a silly old woman, but this means everything to me." "You're not silly at all," Sarah said firmly. "You're honoring your husband's last wish and your son's memory. That makes you one of the bravest people I know." Sarah helped Mrs. Whitmore to her feet and escorted her to a comfortable waiting area inside the palace. She then sought out Captain Morrison, who had become something of a legend among the guards after his success in helping young Tommy Henderson 6 months earlier. She found James in his office, reviewing security schedules for the following week. When Sarah knocked on his door, he looked up with a welcoming smile. The Tommy Henderson incident had not only enhanced his reputation, but had also made him more approachable to his fellow guards. "Sarah, what can I do for you?" Sarah explained Mrs. Whitmore's situation, watching as James's expression grew more serious with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for several moments, clearly weighing the options and potential consequences. "You know, Sarah, 6 months ago I might have told you to follow proper protocols and send Mrs. Whitmore through official channels. But I learned something important from a brave 8-year-old boy. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't found in any manual." He stood up and straightened his uniform. "Let's go meet this remarkable lady." When they returned to the waiting area, they found Mrs. Whitmore sitting quietly, still clutching her handbag. She looked up nervously as the 2 guards approached, clearly worried that she was about to be asked to leave. "Mrs. Whitmore," James said gently, "Lieutenant Chen has told me about your husband's service and your son's sacrifice. I want you to know that what your family has given to this country will not be forgotten." Tears began streaming down the elderly woman's face. "Captain Morrison, I just want to keep my promise to William. He was such a good man, and he never asked for anything in return for what he did." James knelt down beside her chair, his voice filled with respect. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to personally ensure that your husband's medal and your message reach the Queen today. But more than that, I want to make sure she understands the full story of your family's service." For the first time in months, Mrs. Whitmore's face lit up with genuine hope. "Do you really think she might see me?" "I think," James said with a confident smile, "that the Queen would be honored to meet the widow of the man who saved her father's life." On a rainy Thursday evening in November, guardsman Marcus Thompson was completing his final patrol of the palace perimeter when he noticed something that made him pause. Near the servants' gate, partially hidden beneath a large oak tree, was what appeared to be a makeshift shelter constructed from cardboard boxes and plastic sheeting. Marcus had been with the Royal Guard for only 18 months, but he had heard the stories about Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Chen going above and beyond their duties to help people in need. He had wondered if he would ever face a similar situation, and now it seemed that moment had arrived. As he approached the shelter, Marcus could hear movement inside, not the sound of an intruder, but rather the gentle murmuring of someone trying to comfort another person. His training told him to radio for backup and treat this as a potential security threat, but his instincts suggested something entirely different. "Hello?" Marcus called softly, not wanting to frighten whoever was inside. "This is Palace Security. I need you to come out so we can talk." The movement inside the shelter stopped completely. After several tense seconds, a section of the cardboard moved aside, and a young woman's face appeared. She looked to be in her early 20s, with dark hair plastered to her head from the rain and eyes that held a mixture of fear and defiance. "Please don't call the police," she said quietly. "We're not doing anything wrong. We'll leave right away." Marcus noticed that she had said "we," and his concern deepened. "Ma'am, I'm not here to arrest anyone. I just need to understand what's happening. Are you alone? The young woman hesitated, then slowly emerged from the shelter. She was soaked through despite the cardboard roof, and Marcus could see that she was shivering from both cold and fear. Behind her came the source of the murmuring he had heard, a baby, probably no more than 6 months old, wrapped in what appeared to be every piece of clothing the woman owned. "My name is Lisa," she said, instinctively clutching the baby closer. "This is my daughter Emma. We've been staying here for 3 days. I know we're not supposed to be on palace grounds, but I didn't know where else to go." Marcus felt his heart sink as he took in the scene before him. Here was a young mother with an infant, living rough in one of the wettest Novembers on record. The baby was quiet now, but he could see that both mother and child were in desperate need of warmth, food, and proper shelter. "Lisa, when did you last eat? When did the baby last have a proper feeding?" Lisa's composure cracked slightly. "Emma had the last of her formula this morning. I haven't eaten since Tuesday, but that doesn't matter. She's all that's important." Marcus realized he was facing a life-threatening situation. A nursing mother who hadn't eaten in 2 days couldn't properly feed her child, and exposure to the cold and damp conditions could be dangerous for both of them. "Lisa, I need you to trust me for a moment. I'm going to call my supervisor, but not to have you arrested. We need to get you and Emma somewhere warm and dry tonight." Fear flashed across Lisa's face. "No, please. If social services gets involved, they'll take Emma away from me. I can't lose her. She's all I have left." Marcus held up his hands in a calming gesture. "I'm not calling social services. I'm calling someone who might be able to help you both stay together. But first, I need to know, do you have any family or friends who could take you in?" Lisa shook her head, tears mixing with the rainwater on her face. "Emma's father left when I told him I was pregnant. My parents threw me out when they found out I wasn't married. I've been working as a cleaner, but the place I was renting got sold, and the new owners wanted me out. I used up all my savings trying to find somewhere else we could afford." The baby began to cry, a weak sound that spoke of hunger and discomfort. Lisa tried to soothe her, but it was clear that both mother and child were reaching the limits of their endurance. Marcus made his decision. "Lisa, I'm going to radio my captain. His name is James Morrison, and I promise you he's a good man who will want to help. But right now, we need to get you both inside before you get any colder." He gently took Lisa's arm and guided her toward the palace's staff entrance, supporting her as her legs wobbled with exhaustion and malnutrition. The baby's cries grew louder, echoing off the stone walls of the courtyard. "Captain Morrison, this is Thompson," Marcus spoke into his radio. "I need you at the staff entrance immediately. I have a situation that requires your personal attention." "On my way," came James's voice through the speaker. "Are you secure?" "Affirmative, sir. This isn't a security threat, it's something else entirely." While they waited for James to arrive, Marcus managed to get Lisa and Emma into the warm entrance hall. He offered Lisa his jacket, which she wrapped around the baby instead of herself. The gesture wasn't lost on Marcus. Here was a young mother who would literally give the clothes off her back for her child. James appeared within minutes, still adjusting his uniform jacket. He took one look at the scene and immediately understood what Marcus was dealing with. Instead of asking questions about protocols or procedures, his first words were about immediate needs. "How long since either of you have eaten?" he asked Lisa. "Directly." "I had some bread yesterday morning," Lisa replied weakly. "Emma needs formula more than I need food." James turned to Marcus. "Get Mrs. Patterson from the kitchen. Tell her we need infant formula and some hot soup immediately. Then call Dr. Williams from the palace medical staff. We need someone to check on the baby." As Marcus hurried to carry out these orders, James sat down beside Lisa on the bench in the entrance hall. His voice was gentle but firm as he spoke to her. "Lisa, my name is James Morrison. I'm the head of security here, but right now I'm talking to you as someone who understands that sometimes good people find themselves in impossible situations through no fault of their own. Lisa looked at him with wary hope. "You're not going to call social services?" "Not unless you want me to," James replied. "But I am going to make sure you and Emma have everything you need. Tell me, what kind of work were you doing before this?" "Happened. I was cleaning offices at night," Lisa said. "It wasn't much money, but it meant I could keep Emma with me. During the day, I was studying to get my childcare qualification. I want to work with children. I just never expected to have one so young." Mrs. Patterson appeared with a steaming bowl of soup and a bottle of warm formula. Lisa's hands shook as she accepted the bottle and immediately began feeding Emma, who latched on eagerly. "When did you last see a doctor?" Dr. Williams asked as he knelt down to examine the baby. "About 2 months ago for Emma's routine checkup," Lisa replied. "Everything was fine then, but I haven't been able to afford to go back." Dr. Williams listened to Emma's chest and checked her reflexes. Despite the circumstances, the baby appeared healthy, though clearly hungry. "She's a strong little one," he told Lisa. "A few good meals and some consistent warmth and she'll be fine." James watched as Lisa's shoulders sagged with relief at the doctor's words. Here was a young woman who had sacrificed everything to keep her child safe and healthy, and she had succeeded despite facing impossible circumstances. "Lisa," James said, "I want you to know that what you've done for Emma, keeping her fed and protected while living rough, shows incredible strength and love, but now it's time to let others help you both." 3 weeks before Christmas, Sergeant David Walsh was conducting routine security checks in the palace's East Wing when he heard the sound of children's laughter coming from an area that should have been empty. The East Wing housed the palace's historical archives and was typically closed to visitors during winter months. David's first thought was that a tour group had gotten lost, but as he approached the source of the sound, he realized the situation was far more complex. Through a partially open door, David could see into one of the archive rooms that had been temporarily converted into a classroom. Sitting in a circle on the floor were 8 children, ranging in age from about 6 to 12 years old. They were listening intently to a woman in her 50s who was reading from a picture book about dragons and brave knights. What made the scene unusual wasn't the impromptu story time, but rather the obvious fact that these children weren't typical palace visitors. Their clothes were mismatched and showed signs of wear, and several of the younger ones clutched worn stuffed animals or blankets. David recognized the telltale signs of children who had been displaced from their homes. The woman leading the reading group was Mrs. Patricia Kendall, whom David knew as one of the palace's senior archivists. She had worked in the royal collection for nearly 30 years and was known for her encyclopedic knowledge of British history and her passionate dedication to preserving historical documents. As David watched, Mrs. Kendall finished the story and began organizing the children for what appeared to be an art activity. She had set up several small tables with paper, crayons, and paint supplies. The children moved eagerly to the tables, chattering excitedly about what they wanted to create. David knocked gently on the door frame to announce his presence. Mrs. Kendall looked up with a startled expression, clearly not expecting to be discovered. "Sergeant Walsh," she said, rising to her feet quickly. "I can explain what's happening here." The children had gone quiet at the sight of David's uniform, and several of the younger ones moved closer to Mrs. Kendall, seeking the comfort of her presence. "Mrs. Kendall, I'm not here to cause problems," David said softly, noting how the children were reacting to his arrival. "I just need to understand what's going on so I can ensure everyone's safety." Mrs. Kendall took a deep breath, clearly preparing to face whatever consequences might come from her unauthorized use of the palace space. "These children are refugees, Sergeant. They're staying at St. Mary's Shelter just outside the city, and they've been through terrible experiences in their home countries." She gestured toward the children, who were now watching the conversation with wide, uncertain eyes. "The shelter is overcrowded and understaffed. The children have no proper place to play or learn, and many of them haven't been to school in months. I've been bringing them here twice a week to give them some structure and joy in their lives." David looked around the room, taking in the evidence of Mrs. Kendall's efforts. She had created a warm, welcoming environment with books, art supplies, and educational games. On one wall, she had hung up artwork the children had created, colorful drawings of houses, families, and dreams for the future. "How long has this been going on?" David asked. "About 6 weeks," Mrs. Kendall admitted. "I know I should have asked permission, but I was afraid the request would be denied or get tangled up in bureaucracy. These children needed help immediately." One of the older children, a girl with dark braids and serious eyes, approached David cautiously. She spoke with a slight accent that suggested English wasn't her first language. "Please don't make us leave," she said quietly. "Mrs. Patricia is teaching us to read English better. I want to go to school when we get our permanent home." David felt his chest tighten as he looked down at the girl's earnest face. Here was a child who had fled her homeland, lived in an overcrowded shelter, and still maintained hope for her education and future. "What's your name?" David asked gently. "Amara," the girl replied. "I'm 10 years old and I'm from Syria. This is my little brother Khalil." She indicated a boy of about 6 who was hiding partially behind her. David crouched down to Amara's level. "Amara, Mrs. Patricia is doing something very special for you and your friends. Can you tell me what you've been learning here?" The girl's face brightened immediately. "We're learning about English history and reading stories about brave people. Mrs. Patricia says that knowing about our new country will help us feel more at home here. Yesterday, she taught us about a queen who lived here hundreds of years ago and was very kind to people who came from other countries." Mrs. Kendall watched nervously as David continued talking with the children. Several of the younger ones had begun to warm up to him, showing him their artwork and chattering about their favorite activities. "Mrs. Kendall," David said, rising to his feet, "I need to make some phone calls. Can you keep the children occupied for a few more minutes?" Fear flashed across the archivist's face. "Sergeant, please understand that I was only trying to help these children. They've been through so much trauma, and they deserve a chance to feel safe and valued." David nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Kendall, I'm not going to shut down what you're doing, but I do need to involve Captain Morrison. What you've created here is remarkable, but we need to make sure it's done properly and safely." Relief flooded Mrs. Kendall's expression. "You mean we might be able to continue?" "I mean that Captain Morrison has shown a talent for finding ways to help people while maintaining security protocols. Let me talk to him." David stepped into the hallway and radioed James, explaining the situation he had discovered. As expected, James's response was immediate and supportive. "I'll be right there," James said. "And David, get Lieutenant Chen as well. She's good with children. And I have a feeling we're going to need all hands on deck for this one." 20 minutes later, James and Sarah arrived to find the archive room transformed into a bustling center of activity. Mrs. Kendall had organized the children into small groups, with older children helping younger ones with reading exercises. The atmosphere was warm and nurturing, despite the unconventional setting. James observed the scene for several minutes before introducing himself to Mrs. Kendall and the children. His approach was gentle but professional, making it clear that he was there to help rather than to create problems. "Mrs. Kendall, what you've accomplished here is extraordinary," James said after hearing the full explanation of her program. "These children are clearly thriving under your care." "Thank you, Captain Morrison," Mrs. Kendall replied. "I know I should have gone through proper channels, but when I saw the conditions at the shelter, I couldn't just do nothing." Sarah had been quietly interacting with some of the children, helping them with their art projects and listening to their stories. She approached James with a serious expression. "Captain, I've been talking with the children about their living situation at the shelter. It's worse than we thought. They're sleeping on mattresses on the floor, sometimes 3 or 4 children sharing a single mattress. There's no space for homework or quiet activities." James processed this information while watching Amara help her little brother color a picture of a castle. The contrast between the joy and engagement he saw in this room and the conditions Sarah described at the shelter was stark. "Mrs. Kendall," James said, "I want to propose something to you. What if we could make this program official? What if we could expand it and provide proper resources?" Hope flickered in the archivist's eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," James continued, "that we approach this from the top down. The royal family has always supported programs that help refugee children. If we present this as an educational initiative that's already showing results, I believe we can get official backing." Mrs. Kendall looked around the room at the children who had become so important to her. "Captain Morrison, if there's any chance of making this permanent and proper, I'll do whatever it takes." "Good," James said with a smile, "because I think it's time these children had a royal audience." Over the next 2 hours, James worked with Mrs. Kendall to document everything she had been doing with the children. They photographed the artwork, made notes about educational progress, and gathered testimonials from the children about how the program had helped them. Meanwhile, Sarah and David worked with the children to prepare a special presentation. The kids were excited about the possibility of meeting someone from the royal family, though they weren't quite sure what that would entail. "Will we have to bow?" asked a 7-year-old named Omar, who had arrived from Afghanistan with his grandmother 6 months earlier. "Will the Queen have a crown?" wondered Fatima, a 9-year-old whose family had fled violence in Sudan. Sarah smiled at their innocent questions. "The most important thing is just to be yourselves. The royal family wants to meet you because you're special, not because you're perfect." As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that what had started as an unauthorized use of palace space had evolved into something much more significant. Mrs. Kendall's simple act of compassion had created a model program that could potentially help hundreds of refugee children across the country. "Captain Morrison," Mrs. Kendall said as they prepared to conclude the day's activities, "I want you to know that these children have taught me as much as I've taught them. They've shown me what real courage looks." 1 year later, on a bright spring morning in May, the palace gardens were alive with activity unlike anything the royal grounds had ever seen before. The annual Palace of Hearts celebration was in full swing, an event that had grown from the individual acts of compassion shown by the royal guards into a formal program that had touched hundreds of lives. Captain James Morrison stood near the main pavilion, watching with pride as the various elements of the celebration unfolded around him. At one station, Tommy Henderson, now 9 years old and whose mother had made a full recovery, was helping younger children plant flowers in the memorial garden dedicated to military families. His confidence and joy were a stark contrast to the frightened boy who had sat by the palace wall just over a year ago. Not far away, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, now 93, was sharing stories about her late husband's wartime service with a group of current military personnel and their families. The Queen had not only met with Mrs. Whitmore personally, but had also established a foundation in her husband's name to support families of fallen soldiers. The elderly woman's eyes sparkled with purpose as she spoke about William's legacy living on through the foundation's work. In the education pavilion, Mrs. Patricia Kendall was overseeing the refugee children's presentation about their home countries. Amara, now 11 and fluent in English, was confidently explaining Syrian traditions to an audience that included several government ministers and education officials. The palace's refugee education program had become a model that was being replicated in cities across the United Kingdom. Perhaps most remarkable of all was the site near the Family Services tent, where Lisa Martinez was working as a coordinator for the palace's new single-parent support network. Emma, now a happy 18-month-old toddler, played nearby under the watchful eye of volunteer childcare workers. Lisa had completed her childcare qualification with support from the Royal Foundation and now helped other young mothers navigate the challenges she had once faced alone. Lieutenant Sarah Chen approached James with a tablet showing the day's attendance figures. Captain, we've had over 2,000 visitors today, including representatives from 47 different charitable organizations. The media coverage has been overwhelmingly positive. James smiled as he watched the diverse crowd of families, dignitaries, volunteers, and beneficiaries mingling together in an atmosphere of celebration and hope. Sarah, do you remember when we worried that showing compassion might compromise our duties as guards? I remember, Sarah replied. Now I realize that our real duty was always to serve the people, not just protect the institution. Sergeant David Walsh joined them, leading a group of refugee children who were eagerly heading toward the storytelling circle, where several authors were reading from books in multiple languages. Captain Morrison, the children wanted me to tell you that this is the best day of their lives. Khalil said it's better than Christmas and his birthday combined. The success of the day was overwhelming, but James knew that the real measure of their impact couldn't be counted in attendance figures or media coverage. It was visible in Tommy's confident smile, in Mrs. Whitmore's renewed sense of purpose, in Amara's dreams of becoming a teacher, and in Lisa's transformation from desperate young mother to community leader. As the afternoon progressed, the Queen herself made her way through the celebration, stopping to speak with beneficiaries, volunteers, and organizers. Her presence wasn't ceremonial but genuine. She remembered details about individual stories and asked thoughtful questions about ongoing challenges and future goals. When she reached James, the Queen paused to survey the scene around them. Captain Morrison, when you brought that young boy to my office last year, did you imagine it would lead to all this? James considered the question seriously. Your Majesty, I knew that helping Tommy was the right thing to do, but I never imagined it would inspire such a movement. I think what we've learned is that when we respond to individual need with genuine compassion, it creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Indeed, the Queen replied. And what have these experiences taught you about the role of the Royal Guard? They've taught me that our greatest duty isn't to keep people away from the crown, but to help connect deserving people with the resources and support that the monarchy can provide. Protection and service aren't opposite goals. They're complementary ones. The Queen nodded approvingly. Captain Morrison, I want you to know that the actions you and your colleagues have taken over the past year have reinforced my faith in both the institution we serve and the people we serve. You've shown that duty and compassion not only can coexist, but that they make each other stronger. As evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, the 4 guards who had started this journey gathered together near the memorial garden. Marcus Thompson, who had discovered Lisa and Emma, had been promoted to sergeant and was now leading the palace's outreach coordination team. You know, Marcus said, looking around at the evidence of the day's success, when I first joined the Guard, I thought courage meant being willing to take a bullet for the Queen. Now I realize that sometimes the most courageous thing is being willing to break a rule to help someone in need. David nodded in agreement. And the amazing thing is that by following our hearts instead of just following protocols, we've actually made the monarchy more secure and more respected than ever. People see the royal family as genuinely caring about their well-being. Sarah watched as Tommy and Amara worked together to hang a banner they had created, celebrating the diversity of the families that had been helped through the palace programs. I think the most important lesson is that everyone we've helped has also helped us. They've shown us what real resilience looks like, what love in action looks like, and what hope can accomplish. James looked at his colleagues with deep respect and affection. Over the past year, they had transformed from a traditional security unit into something unprecedented. Royal Guards who served not just by protecting, but by connecting, not just by following orders, but by following their consciences. Next week, James announced, we're getting requests to share our model with royal households in 6 other countries. It seems that duty tempered by compassion is a concept that transcends borders. As the sun set over the palace gardens, Families began to make their way home, children carrying balloons and artwork, parents exchanging contact information with new friends, and elderly visitors helped by younger volunteers. The guards remained to oversee the cleanup, but their real work, the work of changing lives through individual acts of kindness, would continue tomorrow and every day after. Tommy Henderson stopped by the group of guards before leaving with his fully recovered mother. "Captain Morrison," he said with the serious tone that 9-year-olds sometimes use when they have something important to say, "my mum says that you and your friends are heroes. I think she's right." James knelt down to Tommy's level, just as he had done over a year ago when they first met. "Tommy, we learned something important from you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone who's brave enough to ask." As the Henderson family walked away, James stood and looked up at the palace that had been his professional home for over 2 decades. Tomorrow, there would be new security challenges, new protocols to follow, and new duties to fulfill. But there would also be new opportunities to show that duty and compassion weren't contradictory forces, but rather 2 sides of the same commitment to serve others. The Palace of Hearts celebration had ended, but the Palace of Hearts, the understanding that true service comes from caring about individual human beings, would continue to beat strong in the hearts of those who had learned that sometimes duty's highest calling is to set aside the rule book and simply help another person in need.